Welcome to the Elaborate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Elaborate Topics. I'm your host for today's show, Stephanie Whitehead. For those of you tuning in for the first time, I'm your podcasting executive laboratory leader and co-host for Elaborate Topics. Elaborate Topics is a weekly podcast where myself and my co-hosts, Lona Small and Taiwana Wilson, are bringing you topics related to the laboratory and leadership that will help you excel inside and outside the laboratory. And I'm so excited for today's show, so I just want to get right into it because today I'm joined by a very special guest and friend of the show, Ms. Dana Bostic. Hi, Dana.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for having me.
I don't have that clapping sound effect machine yet, so if I did, it would have been like that round of applause.
We can do it together. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Well, thank you for joining me today, and congratulations on a job well done as a recent panelist on the ASCP Town Hall.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was honored to be a part of that. Awesome colleagues, a part of that panel, and a really timely, crucial discussion that I hope is an ongoing discussion.
Really, and I think it's a super important topic. If you're listening to the show and you missed the August 6th ASCP Town Hall where Dana and other panelists discussed, like Dana said, the very timely issue of laboratory diversity and health equality, you can go to ASCP.com and view a recording of the webinar. So Dana's bio will be in the link to the show, and today we'll be talking about the emerging solutions and opportunities in the clinical laboratory workforce. But before we do that, I want to talk about some of her awesome accomplishments in her career. So Dana, you've been highlighted by several laboratory professional organizations for your contributions in the laboratory profession. Tell the listeners a little bit why it's important to be an advocate, especially in our field.
Wow, that's a really good question. I would say if I made it, I guess, more of a personal point, earlier on in my career, which I'm sure if I have previous managers or supervisors on listening, I was known to be somewhat of a little hothead when it came to certain things. I always believed in advocating for yourself, being your own advocate, being an advocate for each other, especially when it came around to, holiday time, you're on second or third shift, you're getting the leftover turkey from first shift. Why can't we have our own turkey? That's probably when I really started my advocacy. But then, it just got to a deeper level. It really wasn't about the turkey per se, but it was just about taking care of your people, taking care of each other, doing the best that we can to keep people engaged and interested in the profession. You sacrifice a lot of time, a lot of rest when you are pursuing this degree path or this career path. And so to get in it and just to have just the little things that would bother me earlier on that I would say defend or advocate for, really rolled into bigger things and things as far as, we're always talked about being in the shadows or the hidden profession, the overlooked profession. And that was something that I really took to heart because I was like, man, but we do so much. We play such a major role and part in patient care. It's not just doctors or nurses that are patient advocates. We are patient advocates too. If only people can see us publicly and the errors that we prevent and the lives that are saved by the, information that we generate, contributing to that clinical decision-making process. And so I would say it's really evolved over the course of my career, and it really takes more than one or more than five of us to bring light and attention and voice to what we do, but also just promoting the fact that we are a part of the healthcare team, a vital part, and that we are helping to save lives every day.
That is so good. That's such a great explanation. And you've got the perfect background to be an advocate for the laboratory profession because your background is pretty wide-reaching and very broad, including infectious disease testing, immunohistochemistry, learning and development, interprofessional education, and healthcare stimulation. So why don't you tell the listeners a little about your laboratory journey and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. So during my undergraduate years at Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia, believe it or not, I actually started out as a public relations major. And I really wanted to go into PR. I know it's hard to believe, right?
Really?
And and so I started on that path. However, growing up, I always wanted to be in healthcare. I was always very passionate about healthcare as a whole, especially given the health status of my mom. My mom is a 4-time cancer survivor, so very strong lady. But thank you. And but growing up, experiencing that journey with her, just being around healthcare professionals in that way. My grandmother and my aunt were nurses, and so we had a lot of those interesting conversations around the family table. And so when I started my PR major, although I enjoyed it, it didn't really speak to me in the same way that healthcare always has. It's always been I'll say a cornerstone of my life. And so when I went back to the university catalog and came across medical technology, I looked at it, said, yeah, this seems like a total fit. I love science. Any science course I was in, I pretty much excelled in at that time. And it really piqued my interest. It was a way to get into the healthcare field, and it just seemed to fit my skill set. And so by being accepted into the medical technology program at that time, Armstrong State Atlantic University, which is now part of the Georgia Southern family, so that's awesome. But ended up relocating to Savannah under the tutelage of Dr. Lester Hardigree and Dr. Hassan Aziz. And so I always tell people now, because me and Dr. Aziz get spotted a lot together these days, and I'm like, seriously, he's been my lifelong mentor. So, he's been a part of my life since my undergraduate years, and I really appreciate his leadership and guidance and the firm footing that he had to put into me as an undergraduate student. I was a hardhead. But and so that really started the journey, I would say. And then I was one of the first 2 students from our program to do clinical rotations at the Medical University of South Carolina. So me and 3 other classmates ended up in Charleston, South Carolina for our clinical rotation experience. Loved it there, loved it. That was the best foundation for my career, I would say. We were exposed to so many different things, and their facility is just massive. Their patient population is huge and very diverse. And so anything you can imagine seeing, you saw it there. And I stayed there for a couple of years before returning to the Atlanta, Georgia area to continue my work. So I started out in chemistry, ended up transitioning more so into blood bank around that time. Blood bank was always a favorite course of mine in my undergraduate training, so I pursued that path, working in adult settings, pediatric settings, eventually transitioned into working in a blood donation center that was closely affiliated with a cancer center. And so I got to see everything from blood donor collection through us doing component processing and delivering those blood components to the hospital. So it was interesting to see the process really from beginning to end, or disposition, I would say, with blood products. And that experience created a really good foundation for me to go into infectious disease testing, where we actually performed all the testing on blood components, I would say. So that was a really great, journey. But even in that journey, I was exposed to flow cytometry testing. I was also exposed to different leadership positions. I at one point became a lead, transitioned into a lab supervisor, ultimately becoming a a training specialist, which was, I feel like, more of my jam. I've always been really into education and training from early on. I was always given the new people to train because of my positive demeanor, I would say. I always loved training. And so whether it was students that were observing or new hires or even just annual competency training, I was the point person for a lot of that. And so that, I'll say that love really helped me to transition into other spaces in the lab. And so ultimately, of course, I ended up making that ultimate transition from the bench to teaching. And so that's what I do now as a full-time thing.
Wow, that's an awesome journey, especially hearing that you were the one who volunteered and stepped up for all of the CLS students and new people. But that's not a task that many people often pursue in their daily shift.
Right.
So one of our co-hosts, Lona Small, actually recently did an interviewing Carlos Ledesma on the value of receiving your doctorate in clinical laboratory science. And I understand that you're also pursuing your doctorate degree. So tell us how that pursuit is going and maybe what you hope to do after you've achieved that doctorate.
It's going, I would say, really well. Of course, prior to starting this degree, I'd already obtained my MBA and a master's degree in healthcare simulation. But even through going through both of those programs, I would say, I still found myself craving wanting a formal education in education. And so if you research the literature, there's a lot of information out there about the transition of health science faculty from their clinical practice to entering academia. And so one of the things that they've noted is that, you come in with this awesome skill set and experiences that really tailors more so to, clinical training, I would say, but we don't have a firm hold or understanding of pedagogy and how to teach and how to develop objectives and, how to foster learning in different environments and different settings. So I would say more of those formative skills that I would say that I was able to receive a touch of that in my master's degree programs and, of course, in my experience in education. However, I just really thought, if I'm going to stick with being an educator, I really want to be the best educator that I can be. And so in pursuing my doctoral degree in education, I'm hoping to come out on the other end of it, one, a better researcher, and two, a more well-rounded educator so that I can give the most or the best of myself in helping to prepare that future pipeline of laboratory professionals.
Wow, thank you. And so I'm so excited to talk to you today about this topic because it's a topic that's been kind of circulating in our profession for some time, and it's about the solutions and opportunities that we have for our workforce and some of the challenges that we're facing in our workforce, particularly, all aspects, but the laboratory professionals, and even, we could have a whole separate conversation about pathologists. But when we talk about the workforce shortage affecting medical laboratory professors, for our listeners, if you haven't gone back, you can go back to episode 10 for myself and my co-host. In the show, should you pursue an advanced degree or certification, we touched on in the beginning of the show the workforce shortage, and there was an 2018 ASCLS source that projected a 13% increase nationwide in the need for laboratory professionals. However, with the workforce shortage, would we be able to, or kind of the negative perspective of us being able to meet that demand on the increased need nationwide for our profession? So what's your take on our shortage? What's your perspective on the state of our workforce as it is?
I think there's multiple layers to that, especially given I know a lot of the focus or attention has been given to retirement which retirement is a huge factor, and not just on the, I would say, the clinical bench side of things, but also on the education side of it. We're losing CLS educators to retirement, and so how do we backfill those spots or those vacancies? But also given, the number of programs that we have in the country, the number of spots in those programs, also how are we mentoring or preparing our younger professionals to transition into these roles? Are we adequately preparing them to step into leadership positions? Are we adequately preparing them to enter into education? Also, we have to look at the barriers sadly, within our profession when it comes to pay. You'll have students that may consider coming into these programs, but they look at other professions such as nursing, for instance, and say, you know what, both are difficult or hard programs. I'd rather go the path where I'm guaranteed to make more money versus going this route where I may not be making the type of salary or wage that I feel like that I deserve. And so we have to look at, as a profession, how do we, one, increase our wages? How do we up our salaries to make them more competitive, especially given the work that we do, the contributions that we make to healthcare and to patient care. But also, how do we look at promoting our profession, once again, coming out of the shadows of healthcare and making ourselves visible to where it is a profession that attracts more people to the profession, to working in the field. But, and that's why I say there's just so many layers to this. Also, once we get people in, how are we retaining people? Are we treating people well? Are we meeting their work-life balance needs? What works necessarily for one generation may not be suitable for the next. And so how are we accommodating a multi-generational workforce and meeting the needs, the desires, but also the expectations of that workforce and vice versa? Because, we all have to be intrinsically motivated to want to, continue on this path or journey within this field. And I think it's harder when you don't feel recognized for the work that you're doing. But also for some, I've heard people say, well, I've become bored. I feel complacent. I'm not seeing the career path or the desired path that I want to go within this field. So I think definitely with the introduction of the DCLS, that's I'll say a new light at the end of the tunnel where, we've built on to our career ladder and potential opportunities. But I think it also speaks to, just how we can educate the public more on what we can do, how we can contribute, how we can advance. But once again, going back to that point of advocacy, we have to advocate continuously for ourselves and in fighting for the wages that we feel like we so deserve.
I feel like that's super important because when you touched on all of the different layers that kind of compound and create this issue of this workforce shortage, a lot of these are really relevant, and a lot of them, as a laboratory leader myself, are things that you're actively trying to combat every single day. We sit and look at our retention rates, and we, intrinsically study exit interviews from people who have left our department and gone on either to transition to other areas, like you said, they've left the profession and maybe they've become a pharmacist or a nurse because they wanted to make a higher salary, or they've left us to go to another hospital. Both create an impact, a vacancy and a void that you've got to fill and backfill with another competent medical laboratory science. And really just understanding that you can only help the situation through automation so much. Mm-hmm. But at a point, you still need a critically skilled and competent blood bank professional or microbiologist who really, intrinsically understands the dynamics of the laboratory profession to help you. It's becoming harder to, have somebody who is willing to invest those number of years to gain that level of competence and then stay in your area, because, laboratory professionals, I hate to toot our own horn, but, many of them are very bright, skilled, gifted young individuals. And when you have that level of talent, it's very easy to be rude to other professions that you could perceive would be paid more and things like that. We all have bills and things to worry about outside of work, so we completely understand. As part of the shortage, some of the shortage is also due to, as we know, and as you probably know yourself, being so well connected to the circle, the decrease in training programs nationally. And so the decrease of training programs nationally or qualified training programs nationally, coupled with the increase in need for techs, coupled with the number of techs choosing to exit the profession, as an assistant professor in a strong CLS program, is your program taking steps to combat this, or what's the strategy you guys are using right now in your workplace?
World domination is our goal. No, I would say our strategies, we come at it from a couple of different angles. Of course, our recruitment component, I would say, trying our best to get out. I mean, I know it's COVID-19 right now, so it's changed that, but getting out in front of groups, wherever we can, whether it's through volunteer service at a back-to-school fair, or going to speak at different high schools, different area colleges, community colleges, just continuing in our outreach, building relationships, which we could still do even now during this pandemic period, is still fostering and building those community partnerships, and just staying connected to the local needs of our area, as that also does help with our recruitment. But I think also just being very engaged as much as we can, being a part of different societies or organizations such as ASCP or ASCLS. We all have our strengths, our areas of interest. We have a pretty, I'd say, sizable faculty department, and so I think that helps in our reach into these different areas. Maybe one faculty member is very strong in public policy, whereas you have someone else who is really strong in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we really are able to hone our strengths and develop those to make us more of a formidable force, I would say, and getting out there and just staying involved and staying as engaged as we possibly can, while also keeping our ear to the ground about innovations in education. So, getting better at remote online delivery in light of COVID, being able to transition our courses that we would typically do on campus to an online format, but also still being creative or innovative in incorporating interprofessional education and simulation into our program curriculum, so that we are staying as much as we can at the forefront of CLS education, but also making sure that we're staying in tune with the needs of today's healthcare workforce.
So you touched on COVID-19 a little bit, and I'm glad you did, because it's a really relevant in right now where we're facing with everybody gearing up. It's the fall, perhaps going back to school. Schools will look very different than they did last year, perhaps. For other educators out there listening, or even for other CLS students that will be entering into a new semester coming up, talk about some of the specific challenges that you and your education team are facing right now, based on the impact of COVID-19 on the education system, and perhaps how do you foresee educational programs or clinical rotations changing to adjust and adapt to the new guidelines that have been put in place to maintain safety during this pandemic, such as social distancing, all of those things?
I would say, kind of starting with the back end of your question, just because we have learners that have just started their clinical rotations. And so I think one of the biggest challenges we were facing, or areas of concern, I would say, is our students' ability to start their clinical rotations and be able to complete them in the time that is typically stipulated for them to meet their rotation requirements, so that they can, of course, receive the training that they need, and still graduate on time. And so, that's where, once again, that having a really good relationship with your community partners, with your host institutions, having that open line of communication, making sure that we're addressing any concerns or alleviating any concerns. Maybe it's a clinical site that used to take 4 students, now they can only accommodate 1 due to restrictions. So just becoming more well-versed in what may be impacting that facility, what their new guidances or guidelines may be for hosting students, but also making sure that we're meeting them or alleviating those concerns that they may have, such as, well, are we responsible for checking their temperatures? No, we've put a system in place that, they check their temperatures, they're communicating that information, to us on a daily basis that they're same day that they're reporting in for their clinical rotations. You don't have to worry about that. Okay, great. So just, making sure that we're not adding stress or additional burden, I would say, to the sites, because, they're going through their own issues. They're going through their own staffing problems, trying to meet the COVID-19 guidelines that have been implemented, but also now you're having to look out for these students or learners coming into that space and making sure that you're providing a safe learning environment for them as well. So in any way that we can alleviate any additional stress or burden, I would say, we're really proactive in doing our part in doing that. As far as other concerns, of course, we're a very hands-on program. Lectures were on campus. We have student labs. So, reconfiguring that student laboratory space to once again make sure that, because safety is our number one concern for our learners. So how do we make this space productive yet safe? Do we need to add more PPE, make sure that we're well stocked with masks and hand sanitizer and wash stations and, making sure our hallways are clear to accommodate social distancing? What do we need to add? Plexiglass dividers, how do we need to order even more supplies so that learners are not having to share as much? So these were all, we've had several meetings, weekly meetings, really discussing this and brainstorming and just coming up with ideas to really make sure that, we can still provide a quality, effective educational experience without sacrificing safety, as a part of that. So I would say just having that natural concern. We're all human, and, as educators, of course, we're focused on what we're doing in the academic environment, but we have our families at home as well. And so, trying to balance both of those worlds, it could take its toll. We take it home with us every day. And so I think just recognizing and acknowledging the human component in that, and that, we have the same fears, we have the same concerns, there's the same level of worry there, but we're all trying to do our best and do our part. And, of course, just having that shared vision or mental model of us being safe, but also still doing our very best to make the best of things.
Those things are so true. And I would say if you're a person like me operating in a laboratory, one of the advices I would also give is try the best you can to maintain a relationship with the CLS programs that you operate with, because as we're talking about, needing assistance in our workforce, the CLS program is the one of the best resources you could have as a laboratory leader or a laboratory hiring manager of a new stream of qualified applicants coming into your laboratory. And COVID-19, with the potential to, slow that stream down or at least modify, how that stream looks, it's really important that we maintain that open line of communication. So the CLS program leads and educators understand what are some of the, enhancements that we've done in the hospital to maintain safety? What are some of the limitations to the program and to the training and the rotation that we've had to implement to keep the students safe? But then also, just making sure that you keep those lines of communication open so you can maintain that relationship and use those candidates to potentially fulfill vacancies down the line. I think it's really important in the laboratory that you we touched on this earlier, but in terms of retention and in terms of creating those long-term employees in our profession, like you said, that you look for areas of growth. And, nobody wants to come in and just, be the laboratory scientist working the same bench until they retire. A lot of times when you come into the profession, you're pretty early in your life and your career, and you typically want to know that there's going to be areas of growth for you. And some of the things that we've done in our laboratory is, you mentioned it, actually creating a career ladder, and creating a career ladder that works for the employee and also works for the organization. And so the employee gets benefits like, the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to gain more projects, more competency, more skill sets that will be beneficial to them on their resume and be tools that they can add into their tool belt. But then also as an organization, especially if you're like my organization, your level 1 trauma center, it benefits us to have more SBB trained medical technologists in our laboratory, or it benefits us to have other medical technologists that have gotten a specialty certification, like a specialty in microbiology or virology. And, we do, in return, increase the salary so they have a monetary incentive also. But wherever possible, I would suggest that laboratories, try to partner with the human resources and their administration to create those ladders within the laboratory, because sometimes, clinical laboratory scientists to supervisor or clinical laboratory scientists to lead, historically there's a long line to get those positions based on hierarchy and tenure within the laboratory.
Right.
And, sometimes that's not fair. You're not fully using the advantage of the skills and the knowledge set on your team if you're just waiting for the oldest tech to take the next job. So there's a lot of people on your team that can help with validations, write validation plans, assist with, programming, assist with, other IT issues and other things like that if we gave them the chance.
So true. I agree.
Something else that I wanted to get into is you and I, before the show, had talked about medical laboratory sciences, understanding that there's alternative ways to operate within the field rather than leaving the field altogether, and that would be to pursue being an educator. So why do you think it's important for professionals to consider the education route rather than leaving the field altogether?
For me, it's just, I'm like, you went to school for this, You've acquired, all this great content knowledge and clinical expertise. You have something to offer and to give back, whether you realize it or not. And being an educator wasn't really necessarily in my face, I would say. I honestly didn't even consider it until I received a call from a coordinator out in Phoenix that mentioned, hey, I looked at your LinkedIn profile, and I think you'd be great, going into this line of work. What do you think? And I was like, wow, I never thought about that, but I have been training people all these years. It just seemed like a natural fit, a natural transition, I would say. And so I think we need to really talk about it more and promote it more, especially if that's something that you feel like you'd love to do. And I always tell, especially like my mentees, don't feel like you have to abandon the profession to be able to do or pursue another passion of yours. So let's say if you've always wanted to become a teacher, or you've always had a passion for education, you can become a CLS educator, so that way, we're not, losing what you've learned. We're not losing out on all that experience that, we really so desperately need, especially when we look at specialty areas like microbiology and blood bank. We need people who have that experience and that expertise. There is room to be creative and innovative in your educational delivery of that content. But also, it doesn't have to be just education per se. You can go into, health informatics or, laboratory information system development. Being in the Kansas City area, we have Cerner here, and so there are a lot of laboratory professionals that work for that organization. So they're still contributing their education experience, their professional experience to that work that they're doing now. So just know that, it doesn't necessarily require you exiting stage left, to be able to grow and move on. I've really appreciated that I haven't had to lose everything that I learned or miss out on using, what I've given a good portion of my adult life to doing. I'm still able to fall back and rely on that experience to help better prepare the next generation of laboratory professionals. So it's still contributing in some form or fashion. And so I just think that, as I mentioned earlier, just us putting it out there even more, if you are finding yourself becoming bored or complacent or just wanting to do something new, but you have all this awesome and wonderful experience, consider going into education. There are job postings out there. We're actively looking as on this side of the workforce, I would say, for more educators to join the field.
And you've talked in the beginning of the podcast about having a long-term mentor, and you just recently mentioned having mentees yourself. So in that realm, when, you have people who may be thinking and listening to this podcast and thinking, well, I was thinking about applying for, the pharmacy program. Tell us about the value of having mentees or being a mentor when it talks about this subject of keeping people in the profession.
I think it's so beneficial. It's amazing on both sides of the fence. I wish we would have had these opportunities when we started out, especially when you look at organizations like ASCP, ASCLS, and AABB. All of those organizations do offer a mentorship program, whether you want to be a mentor or you need to be a mentee. And that's at any stage of your career. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are a new or entry-level lab professional or a junior faculty member at your program. You could be further down your career path, I would say, but still seek mentorship. I've been in this profession for almost 20 years altogether, and so, but I still need mentorship. I need it, and so, and it's just really, it's having a voice, I would say, and having a safe space to speak with someone about your dreams, your pursuits, your passions, and they just really help to kind of guide that path or, give you things you haven't even thought about or considered. Well, have you thought about this? Have you considered that? This would be a good way to look at something, get a glimpse of it, and then, make a better or well-informed decision. So in me being a mentee, I really appreciate the seasoned advice, I would say, that I receive. And but you have to be open to receiving that too, and taking that information and helping it to guide your decision-making process going forward. And that's been both professionally and academically for me. But in being able to serve as a mentor now, I feel myself growing in that process, just because you're learning how to give more of yourself, I would say, in a way that you're taking on this responsibility of someone really, taking to heart what you have to say. And I want to make sure that, you can't be the same mentor to everybody. Everyone has different individual needs. And so I speak to the individual needs of that particular mentee. If you have a particular area of interest, that's what we're honing or building on. So my first conversation is always, what are your expectations of me as a mentor? So that way I will know exactly what their needs or expectations may be. And I would ask them why they have sought out mentorship. What exactly are they looking at or thinking about to the point where they felt like they needed a mentor. So once again, I'm making sure that I'm advising or speaking to that very thing. And so I think it's a very rewarding experience on either side. And I feel like it is an obligation, especially once we get to a certain point in our careers, to give back. It's just such a special and unique relationship building opportunity. And nothing makes me feel better to see my mentees go on and just do awesome and amazing things. And which I'm sure it's like that for my mentor. And but I would say, there's just no word to describe the joy and the pride that you feel, and seeing someone else do so well or achieve their goal or pursue their dream, all because you gave them a positive word or a positive affirmation, and like, yes, you're doing the right thing. Yes, you're doing an amazing job. People just need to hear positive feedback sometimes. I've been in labs where I received a lot of negative feedback, or, you can't do that. Why are you doing that? You shouldn't do that. I wasn't really lifted, I would say, in some spaces. But when you make people feel like they can do anything or that their dreams are possible, then, it just takes on a whole new level of confidence, I feel. And and we need to empower each other, and mentorship provides that venue to do so.
Yes, and I've had value too in being able to pay it forward and really instill some of the things that were instilled into me and gifted into me in terms of pearls of wisdom into other people. And like you said, it is very rewarding. So for listeners out there that may be discouraged by the uncertainty of the time with COVID-19 or the uncertainty right now in healthcare, maybe they work in a state where they were furloughed from their laboratory and they're kind of looking at what next, what do I do next? What advice would you give to a listener right now who may be searching or discouraged or just not knowing what to do in this season of their career?
I would say, I know it's easier said than done, but not to be discouraged. Sometimes we really do have to, take our lemons and turn them into lemonade, and, just kind of sitting back and saying, maybe this is an opportunity for me to really figure out what it is I want to do next. Do I want to stay where I am? Do I want to relocate? Maybe this is the nudge or the push that I needed to go back to school or to pursue a certain certification. And so, I've been there. I've, been laid off or furloughed, and, in the moment that happens, it's painful. You feel lost and uncertain. But in those same instances, that's where I really saw my growth, I would say. I never would have saw myself relocating to Phoenix, Arizona, had I not been, on the receiving end of, hey, your department is going to close, because you're really forced into making a decision and making a move happen. And so I had to make a move happen, relocating from Atlanta to the Southwest. Same thing with being in Phoenix. Hey, your program has been noted as a program that will be closed within a year's time. Okay, what are you going to do, Dana? I didn't have time to really sit in it that long. Of course, give yourself that moment to sit in it, to absorb it, because, we're human. But then turn that into action. Okay, well, what is this telling me? Do I need to consider something else? And just so happened, timing-wise, I had this opportunity come up in Kansas City. Never been to the Midwest in my entire life. Would have never thought I'd lived in Kansas City. And but it took something like that to happen to propel me to seek other things that I would have never sought out otherwise. And so I see it as a nudge out of my comfort zone, I would say, into something new. And then going into something new, it has turned into a really awesome journey and growth experience. And I've had so many wonderful opportunities being in this new environment, being in the Midwest, getting to learn the Midwest. And so now I could kind of, mark that off as, yeah, I did that. But it took that period to happen to help give me the push, I would say, that I need. So instead of seeing it as a negative, see it as a nudge to inspire you to do something else, to hopefully stimulate a foundation for your next dream or the next chapter in your career.
That's so true. When a door closes, another one opens. You have to be willing to walk through it.
Yes.
So
and that's a leap of faith.
Right, because I've never been to Kansas. How is it? How is the Midwest? How are you liking it?
Actually, it's not bad. It really isn't. And it actually reminds me, it has some notes of the South in it a little bit.
Okay.
So yeah, it's been a pretty seamless transition, with the exception of winter. I grew up on the beach and in the South. Mm-hmm. That's my combined childhood. So getting used to snow is a totally different thing. But it's been good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even with that, I mean, that the layman person looking at you on LinkedIn and watching the success that you exhibit and show in our profession would never know that those things are in your history. So congratulations on being well recognized in laboratory profession. You've been nominated for so many awards and received so many accolades. So tell us what's next for you personally and professionally.
What is next? I need to survive my doctoral program. So I would say that's really what's on my radar is successfully completing my program. I would actually be the first in my family to have that lovely doctor title. And so, anything I do, I know it's not just about me. It's really, I would say, shouldering or building what I heard it somewhere, building a legacy from ashes. So I just want to role model what I can for, especially like my younger family members, what's possible and that it is attainable, regardless of, generational curses or what you've been told what you can't do. And so in achieving that, that would be really amazing and a testament to the hard work of my parents, my grandparents, and so forth. So just really honoring them in that way because I am in a position to be able to pursue that educational degree, and I need to do my part in successfully completing it. So I would say that's really where my eyes are. And, of course, just getting better at what I do, making sure that I am accessible and meeting the needs of my students, because that's really very important and crucial to me, that they're getting what they need, especially now in light of COVID. Pandemic has been really hard, especially on students having to, they're so used to being together and congregating together, and now, everyone's been, I'll say, isolated off into their living spaces. And so just making sure that everyone is well balanced and that we're meeting their needs the best that we can, and supporting their journey, So I would really say that's where my eyes are right now.
Well, that's a great goal. So do you have something you can leave the listeners with that could help them in their pursuit to get better, just like you are doing in your personal life? Any apps that you use or any websites that you could recommend or books that you would request that we all look at so we can be just like Dana?
Oh, gosh, don't be just like Dana. Be better than Dana.
What would Dana do?
Honestly, because I'm in school, I don't have time for apps so much or non-school related reading. But I would say resource-wise, if you are not plugged in already, get plugged into a professional organization. That is my biggest piece of advice. We need more people, especially those earlier on in the profession, to become locked in and engaged in these professional societies. So whether it is ASCP, ASCLS, AABB, ASH, ASM, you name it. There are so many opportunities, growth opportunities, when you really get connected. I've heard some say, I don't care about, growing a network per se. I'm like, but you need a network, especially in those times where you do need reference letters, for instance, when you decide you want to go back to school. Or if you want other job opportunities, just be able to reach out to someone in another part of the country and say, hey, I was laid off or furloughed. Do you know anyone who may be hiring? And so that's my biggest piece is getting yourself connected, getting yourself plugged in, and not just simply just being a member, but becoming a volunteer on special committees or special groups, and make sure it's your area of interest. Like if you're really passionate about diversity, for instance, there are diversity, diversity advocacy councils or diversity and inclusion committees. If you're more into public health policy, there are special committees for that. If you're an educator, there's those opportunities as well. I say one of the biggest things that has helped me along the way is saying yes. A lot of people know that I say yes to almost everything. And that can probably overfill my plate a lot, but it's been very rewarding. Even saying yes to things that appear challenging up front. Challenge is good. Challenge is good for growth, I would say. And so yeah, just, expand yourself in any way that you can, especially given what you may want for yourself or want to be able to accomplish within your career. So that would be my advice, I would say.
And as we wrap it up, tell the listeners how they can learn more about you or reach out to you.
Sure. So when I do have time, you can find me on Twitter. My handle there is @thatlabchick. And then I'm also on Instagram @hello, I am that lab chick. And you can also find me on LinkedIn under Dana Bostic.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today, Ms. Dana Bostic. It was a joy and a pleasure and an honor to talk to you. Thank you to the listening audience for tuning into this show today. And we hope for you to come back and be a regular guest on the show. This was awesome. And
yeah, I would love to come back.
A lot. I think you gave us a lot to think about, so thank you.
If
you'd like what you heard today and you want to listen to our previous shows, please subscribe to directimpactbroadcasting.com. Remember to email us at elaboratetopics@directimpactbroadcasting.com to learn more about this topic and to maybe give us suggestions about other topics or even to be a guest on our show. Like I said, I'm your co-host, Stephanie Whitehead. You can follow me on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram at Stephanie Y. Whitehead, Stephanie Whitehead on Facebook. Please tune in to next week's show where we'll have another amazing episode of Elaborate Topics. And until then, have a good one. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elaborate Topics, where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on directimpactbroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.